Thanks for tuning in to Min for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kufis and Dan Thompson, two avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Min for the Win is sponsored by the Grand Group with Edina Realty. Are you looking to purchase a new home in the Twin Cities area? Or perhaps you're trying to sell your current home? Whether you're upsizing or downsizing, the Grand Group with Edina Realty will meet all of your housing needs. Contact the Grand Group by emailing thegran, that's G-R-A-N, group, at edinarealty.com, or call them by phone at 612-817-8751. The Grand Group with Edina Realty, 7-time Minneapolis-St. Paul Magazine Super Agent Award winners.
On this episode, David and Dan recap the Twins' 3-game series against the Chicago White Sox. Thanks for listening. Enjoy. Thanks for tuning in to Min for the Win. My name is David Kufis, and with me, finally, not as always, folks, finally, with me is Dan Thompson, returned from your world travels. Welcome back to the studio, my friend.
Thank you. It's nice to be back on the continent, too, David. Have you left North America before?
Yeah, Dan, I lived in China for a year. I spent some time in Thailand. I've been off the continent, Dan.
Chile was great. It's like California, but farther, right? So that's kind of what I took away, and a little poorer in spots. But it was lovely. The seafood was great. The ocean was right there. None of my children got swallowed up by it. I don't know if you know, David, but the ocean is a very powerful thing.
It seems that way. Yeah, from all the Disney movies I've watched, I'm pretty certain, yes, it does seem powerful.
One other thing about Chile, I was looking, David. So because of all this World Baseball Classic chatter, nobody was wearing any World Baseball Classic gear. I couldn't see any. I don't know if I saw anybody throw a baseball. And so it got me digging. Do you know how many Chileans have reached Major League Baseball?
I'll say 5.
Zero Chileans have reached Major League Baseball. More Major League Baseball players in history were born on the Atlantic Ocean than in the country of Chile.
Who was born on the Atlantic Ocean?
His name was Ed Perret. He was born at sea on December 5th, 1888 in the Atlantic Ocean. He played, I believe he had 3 outings. He was a pitcher. So he did not have a long career, but he did make the major leagues after being born at sea. The only person to do such a thing.
Well, you know, Dan, this is what we missed with you not on the show, because I can tell you for a fact, neither Hogs or I would have found ourselves down this rabbit hole, I don't think.
Well, that's what happens when you're a little jet lagged and you can't sleep and you're like scrolling through a baseball almanac. This is how you find these things. So anyway, but I listened to you and Hogs. It was great banter. You guys really hit your stride. I don't have a ton of complaints about the things except for Dano. I didn't like that. Like Velo, Dano. It was clever, but I didn't appreciate that. You can call me by my full name.
Yeah. Can I tell you something, Dan? I hate the way Dano sounds. I hate it. And so the only reason I said it is because I knew it would get to you.
Well, it did. Book 'em, Dano. You know how many times I heard that as a child?
I do have a question, though. Has it been hard for you to sort of get into the season? Because it's weird that you were gone for, it started. There's all the energy and anticipation of opening day, and you're just on a beach somewhere eating fish.
So 2 things. I was actually able to watch an early game on the flight because Delta has added Wi-Fi. So that was nice. But I couldn't watch while I was in Chile because the MLB app wouldn't even let me watch games because I was like out of country. You have to buy like another package or anything, something like that. So I was really pretty checked out other than the things that you and Hogs would tell me about these games, David. And that was pretty exciting to be totally beholden to your knowledge and understanding.
It makes me feel like we should have tried harder while you were gone, Dan, is what it makes me feel like.
But the Twins won baseball games, David. They're 8-4 now. They just took 2 of 3 from the White Sox, who can't catch or throw a baseball.
No, it's been rough. So I think we've welcomed you back, Dan. We've gotten your thoughts. I think it's time we actually jump into that series recap.
So game 1, David, the Twins actually find a way to lose this baseball game. And 4-3. Again, a game where the Twins, I felt like they were going to somehow be able to get back into this game because the White Sox had 3 errors. They just kept giving them opportunities.
So many wasted chances. So the Twins only had 4 hits, and it's a little disappointing. So Maeda was on the mound, right? He goes 6 innings pitched. He gives up 4 runs, which I don't even mind compared with what we had last year, Dan. 6 innings pitched and 4 runs. Last year, we would have taken that every single outing. So like this offense, if they weren't playing with a AAA lineup in this particular game, they definitely would have been able to come up with a way to win this one.
Right, because Correa didn't play. He actually didn't play all series. Larnach actually led off, which was a little bit strange. No Buxton until a pinch hitting appearance late in the game. So yeah, this was a little bit strange. I'm with you on Maeda, where I think even you said this last season, like you don't even mind if a guy goes out and gives gives up 4 runs as long as he can give them 6 innings. And we're just seeing this trend of like, you can actually kind of save your bullpen arms for when you actually need them, not the 4th inning.
It seems odd that we've done such a shift in our minds that right now it's the offense that's struggling. The starting pitching seems to be on point. And so last season we were just dying for starters to go deeper into games. And now we find ourselves this season just begging for someone to get a hit at an opportune moment.
One moment that I was a little thrown off by was this umpire discussion in the bottom of the 4th inning. And Corey Provis, who was still filling in for Dick Brammer at the time, he and Morneau, Justin Morneau, were talking about how, like, why isn't the ump talking about what they're talking about? Like, he pulls everybody over, and I just think, aren't they supposed to do that?
You would think that with the new communication involved and all of the different scoreboards and whatnot the Twins have available, somebody would be able to clue us in as to what was happening.
Because it looked like maybe, I think they speculated there was something about maybe some trash talking at one of the bases or something like that. It was very weird, but I would love to know that kind of thing because if, that's the kind of transparency that fans appreciate in football. Like, don't we love in football when Ed Hockley or his son now comes out and like explains the situation of a ruling in a very interesting way? Like, I feel like umpires, do they just not have the charisma to be able to pull off such an announcement?
It's a new skill set, Dan. I mean, they are used to only saying ball, strike, and you're out of here. Like, that's really all that umpires know how to say in baseball. And now they're just given a mic and expected to speak to thousands.
And pretty soon we may not even let them call balls and strikes, right? They might just get to like be a robot back there.
Yes.
Another moment was that, Buxton finally did come off the bench. You and Hogs had talked about how you were waiting for him to finally do this. And then I thought he even burned the DH to keep Buxton from going into the field.
I was pretty surprised about this because I was pretty convinced with the way the season had played out thus far, anytime that Buxton had a day off, he was not pulled off the bench, even in moments where it seemed like, come on, Rocco, this is the time. So clearly there's a shift happening where Buxton is available off the bench, or at least it seems that way now.
I think so, and that ought to be good. Even Rocco said something today, I think, after Game 3 about how, there's a reason guys are sitting when they're sitting. It's basically because they're hurt in some capacity. So if Buxton is healthy, and we'll talk about that more after Game 3 as well, then yeah, you got to use him, especially when you're only down 1 run.
Yeah, so you had put a note here that it was really only one bad pitch that was Maeda's undoing, and I just had to reference just like Joe Ryan's last outing.
Well, but like the Twins, again, the starting pitching has been so good. It's so refreshing to see, which I guess is a good segue into Game 2.
Absolutely. This is a fun one. Another extra innings win for your Minnesota Twins, shockingly. Twins come away with this one 4-3. And Dan, your guy, Michael A. Taylor. Mm-hmm. We have to talk about this for just a second. Before this series started, Dan texted that he was very upset that Willie Castro wasn't starting against Lance Lynn because he had great numbers against him. But he was also upset that Michael A. Taylor keeps getting at bats. And then Michael A. Taylor decided, well, I'm going to shut that Thompson guy up this series, let me tell you. Because he basically put the team on his back to win this one, Dan.
He did. He had a home run. He went 2 for 4 with that 1 run, 1 RBI. He did strike out twice, which I'm not a big fan of. But he's played center field like every inning of this season so far. And he's, at least now he was over the 200 line. But my gosh, he even factors in at the end. He has the bunt here in the bottom of the 10th where, of course, fittingly, the White Sox throw the ball away, which allows Willie Castro to score from third. So that was pretty cool. But yeah, a 4-3 win after the Twins tried to give it away in the 9th when Duran gave up a home run on the very first pitch of the 9th inning. Talk about anticlimactic.
It was a breaking ball, and it stayed in the zone a little bit longer than I think Duran intended to, and that one got deposited into the seats here. But I do have to say about your guy, Michael A. Taylor. He's now your guy, just in case you were curious.
He's Michael Taylor. That's what I was going to call him.
The bunt that he put down, we shouldn't just gloss over that because it was a really well-placed bunt. It was going to be a hard play for the third baseman, and the throw actually wasn't that terrible to the first baseman because it hit Michael A. Taylor in the helmet. So it wasn't like
That's true.
Totally
true.
offline. But it wasn't a good throw. Like, you shouldn't throw it into the runner. But at the same point, like, a well-executed play that at the very least, had it been a competent defensive performance, would have advanced the runner to third.
Well, and to be fair, the Twins were doing exactly what we've wanted them to do in these situations because they held the White Sox without a run at the top of the 10th. All they need is the 1 run in the bottom. And yes, they bunted to try to get the runner to third, which is exactly what you ought to be able to do, especially when you got the top of the lineup coming up after that.
Exactly. It's one of those things where I wonder if teams don't take that into account enough when you realize which hitters you have coming up. Because I think that really bothers me when I see it like at the end of an inning where you send a guy to steal and you're like, why are you having him steal when you have your number 9 batter up right now?
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, you don't want that guy to have an extra at bat. What are you doing here?
The last thing about this that I wanted to say is it was a shame that Duran gave up that home run because it spoiled what would have been a win for Pablo Lopez, who looked really good after the 2 runs in the first inning. He retired 23 guys in a row.
Yeah, 7 2/3 innings, only 2 earned runs, 10 strikeouts. Dan, if this guy can stay healthy, we'll talk about Luis Rise a little bit later, but my goodness, both teams here just got an absolute steal of a trade. I don't even know who's winning this trade right now, Dan.
No, I think it's a win-win is what they call it, I suppose. And
yeah, it's actually a win-win-win, Dan, because the teams won and we won, Dan. We're all
apparently
winners.
too. Well, let's go to Game 3, which was an exciting one as well. With more injury scares. The Twins do win this game 3-1. They had a couple insurance runs in the 8th inning that they desperately needed because the White Sox do just get their one off another home run off Duran in the 9th, but then ends up being all the damage. And again, another really good pitching performance by the Twins.
Yeah, so Sonny Gray only goes 5 innings pitched. He gives up 2 walks, but he has 5 strikeouts, no earned runs, and I think he would have gone longer. But here's the thing: turns out he's sick. He's not even 100%. He's coughing up a lung. He threw up before he started out on the mound, and he still threw 5 innings of shutout baseball. Dan, if I get a cold, I am well known to be mocked by friends and family alike for my man cold abilities and how I am unable to get out of bed. Sonny Gray just threw up and got out on the mound and threw the ball 100 miles an hour. I don't know that I could do that, Dan.
No, and we were wondering, like, why was he leaving the game in the 5th inning? Because it seemed so against everything that we've heard Sonny Gray talking about. Ends up working out because the Twins, because they had the arms, right? Because they didn't have to burn these guys early. Alcala comes out, Jorge Lopez comes out, Jax comes out, and then Duran ends up coming out too. And I loved that they brought in Lopez at the time that they did because it was a key situation in that game. I love that they're not afraid to use those big arms in the 6th or the 7th inning, because if that's when the high leverage situation is, then that's when you have to use them. Yeah,
so Hogs and I talked about this quite a bit to see that Rocco really has quite a bit of freedom to play with this bullpen, to use the arms when he feels they're most necessary, and there's no set roles. And we both sort of said that we kind of like the idea of there being a solid closer and like just that that's the guy. But honestly, don't mess with something if it's not broken.
Well, and then offensively for the Twins, Ryan Jeffers scores their first run after he triples. It's so weird to me when guys like catchers get triples. I think even Justin Morneau said this, because it means that somebody in the outfield made a mistake, but it wasn't an error. Exactly, like a dumb, I guess this is what Hogs would call it.
Yeah, so Sheets is playing right field at that time. It seemed like he had a read on the ball, and then he fell in a way that I feel that I would fall after tripping on one of my children's toys, right? Like he sort of saw it coming, but didn't really see it coming and couldn't really catch himself. And he's trying to make sure the kid is okay, the ball being the kid in this illustration. And he falls to the ground. And everyone's like, what just happened here? And Jeffers is just making his way around the bases.
It kind of reminded me of, I think it was in the previous game when Vasquez was trying to stretch something into a triple on not quite the same play. But good on Jeffers. I think it was even a stand-up triple after all of that.
Yeah, he managed to get in. He didn't even need to get his pants dirty, Dan.
But it wasn't all great, David. The Twins had a couple more scares, certainly. At least one scare and one real injury.
Yeah, so really, really scary time here. So Giolito's on the mound, Farmer's at bat, and he throws a 91, 92 mile an hour fastball that's up, and it gets Farmer. Like, Farmer tried to get out of the way of it, but it was like at his head, and there was nothing he could do about it. And it was scary because he went down and he kept his face in the dirt. So turns out, though, seems like he's doing great. He had surgery tonight. They had to like re-implant 4 of his teeth and do a couple other things to do some sutures on some of the lacerations on his cheek, but no broken bones. So the surgery, they said they went well to reset the teeth, and we'll see how long it is until Farmer finds his way back on the field. But it seems like pretty much a miracle is what Rocco called it, that he didn't break any bones.
Yeah, it'll be hopefully he's only out for a limited amount of time and not, you break your jaw, you're going to be out for quite some time.
And so the other injury, well, and we don't even know it's an injury. This is what bothers me, because on Twitter and all of the articles I've seen thus far before we've recorded, nobody is saying that Buxton is actually injured. They're just saying that, and Buxton has an injury. But he doesn't really. Like, it's a really weird play, okay? Gordon hits a ground ball. Buxton is trying to get to second. It's a weird play because the ball is hit a little bit to the right of second base. The second baseman is coming in. the ump is positioned a little bit funny, and Buxton is trying to beat the second baseman to the spot where the ball is hit so that he can get to the bag. And what ends up happening is one of the weirder collisions you'll see, because it sort of looked like, it looked as though Buxton ran into the second baseman, but it almost looked like the way that you would expect someone to run into the catcher to try and prevent the tag from sticking, right? Like, and so he just kind of bowls into him. Buxton gets called out on interference, but Buxton got not superplexed. I forget what wrestling move this is, though, where he gets like flipped over and he like lands on his neck. And so he's still traveling with the team. They said they're going to see how he does waking up tomorrow morning, but he doesn't look injured, I guess, at this point. I mean, he probably has some bumps and bruises, but hopefully at this point there's nothing serious.
Yeah, it looks like one of those plays that hopefully looks much worse than it actually was. I was worried he maybe had a concussion or something like that. Glad he wasn't. I guess his other option was to stop running, but I don't think Byron Buxton really knows how to do that. So
if there's one thing we know about Byron Buxton, he does not know how to stop running. But I guess, yeah, there is one visible injury. He had a laceration over his eye, so hopefully it's not a big deal. Last note here on Game 3 before we get into our segments, there was a great play in the top of the 8th by Nick Gordon. Diving stop to his right, threw out the runner at first, and a really important play to make sure the challenge by the White Sox was shut down early.
That's are you back on the Nick Gordon train here, David?
I'm still conducting. I would like to see some form of production from him, would be nice. So I got to celebrate the defensive plays at this point until he gets the bat moving.
All right. Well, David, I think it's time to move on to the segments.
Catch 'em all, Kirby Puckett!
Puckett's Picks Winner.
You are shaking your head, and I can totally imagine why. But here's the funny thing. You picked a guy who didn't even play in a game, and you still finished second. I think we should celebrate that, David.
It's so frustrating. So I took Correa because, again, my rule always stands. If Correa is available, I'll take him. And Correa did not see a single at-bat. So he scored 0 points for Puckett's picks. And then the listeners took Buxton, and Buxton scored 3 points. And you're thinking to yourself, well, the Twins won 2 games, and the listeners took Buxton. Clearly, Dan must have won. No, because Dan Thompson took Trevor Larnach, who scored -3, Dan.
It was a rough outing for Trevor Larnach. I kept, every time he would come up, I'm like, he's 1 home run from winning this for me, and then he would strike out. So, bummer on Trevor Larnach. So now I have this big red box on our spreadsheet here that I have the lowest of the season score. And here's the thing. So the listeners and I still have 2 wins apiece, and you have 0, but the listeners have now passed me in season points scored, David. They have 16, I have 15, and you, David, have 2 points. 2 in 4 games. 4 series.
I think, Dan, here's the thing. When you win Puckett's picks as often as I do, it just makes sense to make it competitive. I have to give you guys a little bit of a head start before the points start rolling in for me.
You're spotting us. How kind of you. How generous. My
gosh.
We'll
see. We'll see. I'd love to tell you I'm going to pick someone different, but we'll have to see what happens when we make our picks for the Yankees in a bit here.
Beast versus Bench.
Is losing fun? Is losing fun?
Okay. You go first, but again, as I mentioned earlier, Dan Thompson was hypercritical of Michael A. Taylor, and I have been a guy from the get-go who has said all that he needs to do is play a phenomenal center field. And if he gets a hit once a series, honestly, I'll take that at this point. I don't even care. Get a hit and a walk in a series, that's a win for me. I'll let you defend your pick. It's a good pick. I'm just mad that you're the one making it, Dan.
Well, I'm picking Michael A. Taylor because, for goodness sake, he did have a good game 2 and 3. He did not have a great game 1, including a bunt that was very poorly done, right back to the pitcher. But I will say this. He's better than anything the Royals are putting out there right now. I don't know. You showed me a stat, I think, where the Royals batting at, they've got like 8 guys batting under 200 right now. But I don't think it's enough to be a center fielder and just play a great center field and get a hit a series. That's not enough. He's got to do better than that.
It'd be great if he did, but that's all that we're really asking of him, Dan.
Well, I should give his line. So he was 2 for 4 with a couple RBI in game 3. And then in game 2, I think we talked about this earlier, he was 2 for 4 with a run and an RBI. Game 1, again, he wasn't great, but he did score a run. And you know what? He was better than most of the Twins bats who just weren't great in this series.
Yeah, I think that Taylor is the correct choice, but for a little bit of parity, I'm going to give it to Solano. He's quietly done quite well for the team thus far. He went 5 for 13 in this series. And really, just to know you have someone solid at first base who knows the position well, and he does seem a little bit to have some leadership about him when he's playing at first base. You can kind of tell the way he's communicating with the other infielders. When Correa's not on the field especially, you need to have some veteran leadership, and he seems to fit right into that role.
He has been great. Well, who's on your bench then?
Well, here's the thing, okay? I'm sorry about this. I am really sorry. I don't want to do this. Kyle Farmer's on my bench, and honestly, I hope he recovers. I hope he makes it back to the field quickly. His teeth all get set in. But up to the point of his at-bat where he got hit, Dan, he was 0 for 9 with 8 strikeouts and 7 guys left on base. Again, feel terrible. I hope he recovers quickly. I hope he's not in too much pain. But that's bad baseball playing right there, Dan.
That is pretty awful. That's a lot of strikeouts, David. That is literally one at-bat better than you or I could have done in those situations, right? Well, I went with Trevor Larnach, actually, for just because I'm mad at him that he lost me in Puckett's picks. But he was not great either. He struck out a couple times in Game 3. In Game 2, he struck out twice. He did have a walk and a hit in Game 2, but there were just big spots where he didn't really do much. He was 1 for 5 with an RBI in Game 1. I felt like they needed more out of him in this series, and all of those strikeouts when he couldn't even just move a runner or things like that. That's why I put him on my bench.
It makes some sense, and it's good to have you back. There's one thing you can count on, Dan, and that is if his guy wins Puckett's picks, he'll likely be his beast, and if he loses Puckett's picks, he'll likely be his bench.
Well, unless a relief pitcher had a really bad, 2 outs, something like that. I'm happy to throw it at a reliever there, which Hogs picked a reliever once, and he was like apologizing for it. It was like, Hogs, that is the right choice in that moment. A reliever can be on your bench if he blows a game. Like, that's okay.
Okay. With that, Dan, let's go to Rocco's Rewind.
Rocco's Rewind.
So I'm going to go back to Game 2. I almost actually put Pablo Lopez as my beast because of his 23 consecutive outs. I thought he was so good. But it was an interesting situation because he gets pulled out of the game with 2 outs in the 8th inning with Andrew Benintendi coming up, who Benintendi seems like a Twins killer. I've never liked this man. Ever since he came up with the Red Sox, he always seems to hit well against the Twins. They put in Thielbar, and I'm going to credit Rocco here. It worked out because Thielbar, I believe, struck out Benintendi or got him out, and they were out of that jam. But that's a situation where I'm like, don't you just let Lopez try to get the out there?
Too close of a game, I think, at that point, especially knowing sort of the future of what happens in this game. I think that's the right call. He's given you a ton. 7 2/3 is a long way for a Twins pitcher, Dan. Pull him out, prevent the damage, bring in your firefighter, and get it done.
And again, it worked out. The proof is in the pudding, I believe is the phrase. But I was just like, my heart wanted Lopez to get another shot.
I understand the sentiment. I would have been happy had he been able to finish the 8 innings. But really, I'd rather have the victory than let Pablo go to 8 innings.
Well, absolutely. Well, what are you thinking here about Rocco?
So I'm interested about Game 3 because Sonny Gray comes out after the 5th inning. And granted, it's still a close game, but you have a lot of innings to cover, and you do not have an off day for a while. And so you're going to have to use 4 relievers to get through this game. Or you have a guy in the bullpen who is specifically there to eat innings. So you have to wonder, Rocco doesn't have a lot of faith in Sands. After this quick pull of Gray, why not go to Sands here?
Well, I think you said it because it was a 1-0 game at that point. He really wants to win that series. And, again, they're going to New York next. So we'll see. I do share that question, though, because then why is Sands on your roster if you're not going to use him in a spot like this? It almost forces you to have to use him, in one of these first 2 games against the Yankees, almost regardless of the scenario.
Yeah, and that's what maybe bothers me the most is because you have Duran, you have Jax, guys who have pitched a lot now the last couple of games that might not be ready to go or might not at the very least, they won't be fresh enough to see Yankees lineups in Yankee Stadium.
Well, yeah, you certainly can't have Duran in Game 1. He's got to have at least a day off. So they're going to have to rely on some other arms. Or maybe, you know what? Maybe let's lose on purpose the next game here, and then they won't have to worry about that.
Well, let's hope that's not the case here. Let's go forward here, Dan. Minnesota moment.
Minnesota moment.
A little bit we've talked about this, but that 10th inning win in Game 2, I thought was a great moment for a couple reasons. So the Twins, they give up the lead right away in the 9th, and you're thinking, this could have been so much faster than even these already fast baseball games. And then they come out and they get the 3 outs in the top, and you're thinking, this is not how this normally goes for the Twins. The other team does the simple thing, right? They move the runner. They bring the runner in. That's what other teams do. That's not what the Twins do, and that's precisely what the Twins did in the bottom of the 10th. It makes it look so easy when the Twins just do those simple things.
How much of this do you think is the ability of the players this season compared to who we had available last season in these circumstances?
Well, I think with the pitching staff, that is significant because the Twins have the ability to throw almost 100 miles an hour with a number of guys that they can, you need strikeouts in extra innings. You have to be able to do that. and they can do that. Looking at the lineups, though, this lineup, do you think this lineup now is better than what they had last year with all these injuries?
I have no idea. I honestly don't know. But I guess I wouldn't have predicted that Michael A. Taylor and Willie Castro combined for the game-winning run in the bottom of the 10th inning.
If I'd have told you, David, is that what you wanted to say there?
I would still take the victory, even if you had told me, Dan.
What do you got, sir?
Yeah, so I'm going to go with the Farmer Buxton injuries in Game 3. Here I am calling Buxton's injury an injury, even though I've just said that I don't really think it's an injury. But it's been a rough season. And last season, this was the storyline, obviously, the historic collapse of this team to finish 14 games back after leading the AL Central for a majority of the season. But Dan, if you look at this team right now, and you look at the IL, Polanco, Kirilloff, Kepler, Winder, Henriquez, Celestino, which that's okay. He can recover a little bit.
For a little while longer.
But now you add Farmer to that list. That is a lot of guys, Dan, who we were expecting to see a lot of at-bats already at this point in the season who are injured. And so now looking at this lineup, Dan, it's sort of hilarious because your first four are the guys you sort of expected, but not even that, because you have Buxton, Correa, Larnach, Miranda. Larnach was the only guy to make the team because Kirilloff and Polanco couldn't. Like, Larnach would have been at AAA to start the season, and now he's kind of the guy. And so then your lineup goes Wallner, Julian, Solano, Taylor, Vasquez. I mean, I guess, again, Vasquez is sort of there, obviously, and Solano you thought could fill in here and there, and Taylor would play some center. But this is just a bizarre lineup that we find ourselves with, Dan, this early in the season. However, Dan, it needs to be stated, it does look like Gallo and Kepler are likely to be back for the Boston series. Polanco and Kirilloff just had rehab starts together where they bat first and third respectively in the lineup. So guys are getting close to returning, Dan.
Well, let's see. Well, that segues into my musing here, so let's take it into that.
I just don't know how it can get any better.
Mauer's musings.
Here's my question. Are we wrong to be cynical about the Twins' conditioning programs and that, maybe it wasn't just Michael Salazar?
He was just the scapegoat.
He was just right. Like, there's a whole, the athletic training system. There's something flawed in what they do in target field. And more seriously, this is my question. Is this injury or pain that these guys are feeling here? Because Joey Gallo apparently was just able to. He seems to have gone through the pregame routine for the last week, and he's been on the injured list now for a couple. I'm just very confused. And Byron Buxton, I just Carlos Correa. Could they just have put Carlos Correa on the injured list? I just don't understand what's happening here. Do they not know how to handle broken things?
I think that there's more to be said because, first of all, the guy who the Twins brought in, they have to be paying this guy a substantial amount of money because supposedly he's thought of as one of the best training staff leaders in all of baseball. And so I don't think you can say with a guy of that pedigree and track record that there's something wrong with the training staff. And you have to remember, Dan, even before the season started, a lot of these guys were already banged up. It's not like he came in, everybody was 100% healthy, and then the house started on fire and they all tripped over themselves trying to get out. No, a lot of these guys were already injured.
Well, that's true. I mean, Kirilloff had the surgery to kind of reduce the size of his arm. Polanco
They chopped it off, Dan. They chopped it off and they used Elmer's glue to put it back together.
It's kind of like what they're doing with the lineup right now. And then, Gallo has seemingly been wanting to play. Kepler, I don't know. Who knows? Maybe the Twins are better off without Kepler in the lineup. But I guess it is giving us a chance to see guys like Eddie Julian, who I guess prefers to be called Eddie, which is fantastic because it's so good that there's an Eddie in the lineup, David.
I knew you'd love it, Dan.
If we can't have Eddie Rosario, at least we can have Eddie Julian. So I guess I'm happy the Twins are 8-4 with all these injuries, but at some point you're not going to beat the Yankees and the Rays and these other great teams in the majors right now in the American League anyway. That without those guys.
So I'm going to piggyback off you here a little bit because Joey Gallo seemed to be available to pinch hit a couple of games ago. He had his helmet on, he had a bat in hand. It doesn't really seem to me that he's injured, but then we get news today that he was added to the IL and he's being sent to AAA to play with the Saints for a couple of rehab starts. Now, Dan, here's my question. He wasn't gone for all that long. It's not like he's been out for a couple of weeks and he needs to get his swing and groove back and go through another spring training. The guy was on the bench. He'd done all of his pregame stuff. So here's the thing. What I think, Dan, that they don't want Joey Gallo to have to go back to New York. That's what I think is the issue here. I think that they thought, you know what? The timing works out now that we could put him on the IL. He could sit for the Yankees series, play with the Saints, and then come back in Boston, and no one will be any the wiser.
But, has he really been out that long? It doesn't feel like Joey Gallo's been out for, you just alluded to this. When was his last at-bat?
It looks like it was an at-bat against Houston on the 7th. So it works out pretty pretty well for him to come back in time for that Red Sox series, Dan.
I don't know. I would say just stay home. Then they got 3 series at home after that. Like, maybe he just doesn't want to travel to the Northeast at all. Maybe the cold weather gets to him. I don't know. Wasn't it like 80-something degrees here in Minnesota this week?
I don't know. It's just so funny because I kind of think that this is happening without Joey Gallo understanding what's happening. Because I read a couple of quotes from him that he seemed like, oh, yeah, I'm good to go. Let me just go down to the Saints here and get a couple of at-bats in Nebraska or whatever. And it's like, Joey, do you not see what's happening here? They don't want you to go play the Yankees, Joey.
Oh man, I hope Joey's okay. I hope he's enjoying himself in Indianapolis or wherever the Saints are playing.
I think he's fine, Dan. I really do. I don't think there's anything wrong with him. That's my whole point.
All right. Well, David, it's the segment we've all been waiting for. It's the series grades.
Series grades.
Every time you were gone, Dan, every time I presented a grade, I don't even remember last season. Did you chastise me as much as Hogs did for every single grade I gave in a series?
It was certainly nice to hear Hogs doing it, but I don't know that I had the stamina. He really could go after you for a long time there, David, about your grading system.
And I cut most of the nagging from him. I just would cut it right out of the episode. And there was still like half the episode was Hogs just ragging on my grading systems.
Well, so I thought as a teacher, David, I needed to bring some structure, finally, to this segment here. So I have created a rubric for my grading. There are 5 categories. So I was basing this at first on the 5-tool baseball player, right?
Okay, hang on. Let me get comfortable here. I didn't realize this was going to be a whole dissertation you were presenting.
It's going to be a bit. I've got it written out on like the back of like, a piece of mail, which by the way, I love that. I write so many notes on like junk mail's, envelopes, right? I don't know if you do this. Anyway. So
my kid loves the shredder too much, so I just let her throw those things in the shredder. Yeah.
So I couldn't have hitting for power, right? Because if you think of a 5-tool player, that's what they have: hitting for power, fielding, running, and throwing. Well, that didn't quite work for this. So here I have my 5 categories, David: hitting, fielding, running, starting pitching, and relief pitching. Those are my 5 categories, and I'm going to try to hold myself to these things. And you get 10 points. There are 10 points available for each category, right? And then at the end, you get a total out of 50, and you score it out.
Okay, so I have a question though, Dan.
Yeah.
How does winning games factor into any of this? I noticed that that's a category that seems to be lacking out of your 50 points. Like,
that's interesting.
They can play really, really well.
It doesn't. See, that's the beauty of it, David. It's pure. It's not going to be settled by, wins and losses. It's going to be settled by pure athletic ability.
If Hogs does not give you the business the next time you two are on an episode together, I will lose my mind, Dan.
So how about you give your grade first, because then I will have a better grade, a more accurate grade to give after yours.
So this is a hard one for me to grade, Dan, because the Twins were basically putting up AAA lineups, and they're going against a couple of pitchers who are top-notch guys, or at least have been, right? So Dylan Cease and Lance Lynn. And honestly, if the White Sox knew how to field even a little bit, the Twins likely would have lost at least 2 of 3 here. But so because of all those factors, they did win the series, even if it wasn't in the most glamorous fashion. I'm going to give them a B.
See, the beauty of my system is that none of what you said is on the rubric, David. It has no factor in my grade. AAA lineup, doesn't matter. None of that matters. So I'm going to give you, do you want each category?
Well, I have to now. Okay, we're too in it. We're far too in it for me to not hear this.
So the batting was a 7 out of 10. I just thought too many situations with runners left in scoring position, not enough runs.
Wait, so hang on real quick. This is important to establish early because of your rubric here. So 7 out of 10 would be 70%, which would be close to an average, right? But is 70 average in this rubric, or is like 5 average?
No, so 70 would be like a C, right?
Yeah.
So yeah.
Okay.
You kind of get some free points. It's like in every really assignment that teachers give out. You always get a few free points just for turning in something with your name on it, right?
Wonderful.
So the Twins have that. All right, so 7 out of 10 batting. So you can call that a C if you wanted. Fielding, I gave him like a B+, 8.5 out of 10. Running, I thought actually the base running in this series was quite good. I even liked the Vasquez trying to go for third in that situation because he's that much closer with the 2 outs. And then it worked out because he started on second in the next inning, or he would have if they hadn't pitch run for him. Starting pitching, I thought was a 10 out of 10. I thought, you can't ask for much more out of these guys, especially the way that Lopez recovered. And then relief pitching, because of Duran's struggles with a couple home runs. They weren't totally costly, but they did make him throw a little bit more in the game too. I gave him a 9 out of 10. So if you're scoring at home, that adds up to 44.5 out of 50, which is a B+.
Dan, if we're going to do this every time, you're going to have to do quite a bit of this math ahead of time. Or
I know.
We're going to have to put it in the description. Or you know what? Maybe we could post a separate podcast where it's just you going through your rubric. I can't even digest. I can't even fully comprehend everything you've just said, and I'm trying to understand it so I can critique it, and I can't even get there, Dan. But it just feels it feels too high, is what I'm trying to say.
This is how my students must feel then every time I give them a rubric with all of this information. They're like, Mr. Thompson, just give me a letter. I don't care.
So then you roll a set of die,
exactly.
and then you jump 3 times. So I do want to say, Dan, one of the things about this grading system, I know you're not really an Office guy, right? But I love the show The Office. Sure. I've watched it far more times than I ever should have. But there's a great episode where there's a big divide in the office over whether or not Hillary Swank is hot or not. And they've divided into sides, and they're each making their arguments. And Kevin Malone, he's a genius on the show, Dan.
Sure.
He says, you're making all these fancy arguments, but it's a gut thing. And this is very much a gut thing, Dan. Like, I realize you can't grade your students that way. Maybe you do partially. I don't really know. But I know you can't grade your students that way. But this grade here, I hate the idea of having a rubric because that's not what the grade is meant to be. Because then I hate that you can sort of break this down. Now, granted, at least in your rubric, there's some structure and there's a little bit of wiggle room within each category. But like when Hoax is like, oh, it doesn't make sense. It's like, okay, so if they win 2 out of 4, I should say, oh, well, then that's a C+ because it's a little bit better than average. Well, no, this is more of a gut thing. It's how did you feel during the series? This isn't
how
a
did
hard
you
and fast.
Feel?
No,
what
nobody
are we grading
wants to
on? You
listen
don't
to that.
grade on feelings, David. You
grade
grade on hard
thing.
facts.
It's a gut thing. It's watching the game. It's the eye test, Dan. It's not sabermetrics. Dan. It's the eye test. It's the eye test.
Oh my gosh. No, I am tired of being complained at about the wishy-washiness, and I try to bring some law and order here, David, and then you criticize me for that too. What am I supposed to do?
I am just trying to defend my way of doing things. If you want to do your things your way, Dan, I think that currently this grade that you've given is too high, but I'm not going to criticize the way that you arrived there.
Okay, all right. Well, you just did. So we'll table that. This is the longest series grade segment we've ever had, David.
Well, you had to know when you brought an Excel spreadsheet with the different categories that this was going to take us a little time, Dan.
The first time I had to explain some things. Next time I'll cut to the chase a little bit faster, and the listeners will come along with me.
Well, I would hope so, because 7 listeners just died trying to get through the rubric.
All right, well, let's go here. We have so much more. Herbie's headline, we're going to have to be brief.
I don't know, Jack. It looked like Herbeck pulled him off the bag.
Herbie's headlines.
Yeah, we're going to be very brief, but real quick here. The Rays start, obviously, everybody's talking about it. They're 12-0 to start the season, Dan. Clearly the best team in the MLB, right?
Well, they're one shy of the best start ever matched. But just because you win 12 games in a row at some point in the season doesn't mean like you're going to, we've seen Moneyball, right? The A's didn't win the World Series that year. So good on them. It's fun to see the Rays playing well, I guess. They started a rookie today, but at the end of the day, nobody was there to see it, right? That's the thing about Tampa.
Okay, so another note here. Luis Arraez, obviously well-loved former Twin, now with the Marlins, hit for the cycle, and actually the first cycle in Marlins history. And a couple of notes here, too. This was, I think, before the games today. But Luis Arraez, at one point, was 20 for 39 to start the season. And that's 20 more hits than Pablo Lopez had given up this season.
Gut check, since guts are important for you. Would you rather have Arraez right now doing that or Pablo Lopez doing this?
Assuming Bailey Ober's making the starts, I'd Still rather have Pablo Lopez at this point in the season.
Wow. I think I'd rather have Luis Arraez.
Lopez is a game changer, though.
So is Arraez. You just said he's 20 for 39, David. That's better than 50%. I just did some math myself on the rubric.
But look at his production and what he would be working with here with the rest of this roster, Dan. Maybe they win one more game if Arraez is on this team. But right now, it seems like every start that Lopez has, as long as the Twins can put up one run, they have a good chance to win the game.
Another item here, and this, I don't know how to feel about this one. Salt Lake City, a growing area, let me tell you, out here in the West, is seeking now kind of officially an expansion Major League Baseball franchise. And I don't know how to feel. I would much rather have it in Portland. It's a little bit closer. At the same time, Salt Lake City is a quick flight away from Spokane. But that's really the only thing that I care about is how quickly and how easily can I get to these places. So I'm probably going to err on Portland, but I don't know. What do you think of this?
I think that the MLB has a lot of teams currently and a lot of teams that aren't so good at baseball. And typically, Dan, that means that there's too many teams, not too few. However, baseball is very cyclical also. So you can have a young group of guys who needs a couple of years of sort of building their confidence and getting up to that MLB level of being able to compete in the postseason. So I don't really mind the expansion, but it is hard, Dan, when you're watching some of these teams play and you're like, who? Like, how long has it been since you've been competitive or relevant? Now, granted, this is me talking as a Twins fan, so what do I know?
I do think that there's something nice about 32 teams as opposed to 30, but this year-long interleague play, we don't even almost have to say interleague play anymore like it's a thing, mitigates that quite a bit. I mean, 30 teams, you still got 15 series going on at any given time. So we'll see. It's clear baseball wants to expand. If there's money to be had, then they're going to find it and they're going to expand.
Well, and 32 teams, Dan, for Manfred, making that March Madness bracket out of MLB teams is way easier.
Way easier, right? No buys.
Last note here, and this was Hoax texted me about 9 times talking about these Orioles celebrations. So for homers, they're currently taking a drink out of what the Orioles have been very clear about is a Homer hose and not a dong bong, which is important to differentiate. So on a homer, the guy who hits it takes a drink, I'm sure, of water or Gatorade out of this hose. But they also, anytime someone hits a double, all of the players take a swig of water, stand up at the fence of the dugout, and spit like sprinklers out onto the field.
So, like, are they waiting for a triple celebration too? Like, are they get a single, a walk? Like, how deep are the Orioles going to go here?
I hope deep, Dan, because this is just good for the sport. It's entertainment. The fans love it. Let the guys have a little bit of fun.
Good on the Orioles.
With that, Dan, let's get into our Puckett's picks for the upcoming Yankees series. Ooh.
And we'll see you tomorrow night.
Puckett's picks.
This is always a difficult series, David. I take solace in the fact that the Twins are 8-4, and if they get swept here, they'll still be at 500.
Yes, correct.
So I feel good about that.
I just don't want them to get swept. And honestly, if they win 2 of 4, that is a victory in my mind. And honestly, if they win 1, that might still be a victory in my mind.
Well, we'll see. We'll see who's actually healthy enough to play in this series. The listeners are banking on the fact that Carlos Correa is going to play, and that's what they've said. So Correa is the listeners' pick, which, David, you don't get to have him.
It's the first time this season that I won't be taking Carlos Correa for Puckett's picks. And you know what that means, folks? He will go off. I'm quite certain of it.
Well, I hope that he doesn't quite go off as much as my guy, who I love that I get to pick ahead of you, even though your guy, Carlos Correa, didn't even play in the last series. Trevor Larnach was so bad. So I'm going to make, I guess, my 4th different pick of the season. I'm going to take Jose Miranda.
I am not throwing away my shot.
Well, it's an interesting pick. He's due, I guess.
That's why I picked
really
him.
say.
Yeah, I figured. Yeah, he's gonna break out, especially in New York City. For my goodness, the home of Hamilton, David. If there's ever a time, this is the time for Miranda.
Okay, well, I'm going to take Byron Buxton. I think he's fine. He might sit game 1, but I think he'll be back in it. I think it's likely that if Correa plays game 1, I'm guessing Buxton plays game 1 also, because I think that there's going to be at least one game where the Twins are trying to put their lineup out there that gives them the best shot to win. I'm not sure that it's game 1, but we will see Byron Buxton in this series. Well, Dan, it is great to have you back. It's a different vibe, Dan. I feel like you annoy me, certainly. Not quite as much as Hoax has the ability to. And you and I have known each other for a long time, Dan. And I love you to death. I love doing this podcast with you. Hoax has a special way of getting under my skin that is just, it's hard to replicate, Dan.
Well, I am very happy that Hoax did fill in as much. You guys were really getting into a rhythm there. I don't know that I could have left him with you anymore. You may not have survived the evisceration of Andrew Hoganson much longer.
Every time I said anything, Dan, it's just he felt the need to criticize and critique. I know how you feel now when we're on the show.
Yeah, all right. Well, I think since it's been a while, I'm going to send us out. Folks, if you like what you hear, please tell a friend. You can follow us on Twitter at Min for the Win. You can find our Min for the Win Facebook page. Make sure you're subscribed to the podcast on your favorite podcast platform or on YouTube so that you're notified when new episodes are available. And if you could leave us a rating or a like, we'd greatly appreciate it. If you'd like to support the show further, you can find us on Patreon. Thanks for listening, and as always, go Twins. That'll wrap up another episode of Min for the Win, a podcast hosted by David Kuvas and Dan Thompson, 2 avid fans who appreciate well-played baseball, especially when it's done by the Twins. Thanks so much for listening, and as always, go Twins.